Friday 28th for the 3rd, 2025. The time is 5 minutes past 8, and there are very many F1 centric thread at which we need to pull. We'll have to resume in synopsis the whole circumstance around Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson. It gets techier than I think you realise. So too I want to talk about why the circumstance will be so difficult for Tsunoda-san going into the Japan McLaren, because Tom Biasis has come out and he said some things that I think is what gives rise even to what I think is a broader problem, not just in F1 but FIA. The regulatory body set fair as far as the levelling of the competitive landscape, so too instituting for the rules and regulations in a way that is consistent. I think there is agency here, and I think it's worth pulling at threads. So we talk about Helmut Marko, Liam Lawson, because again, this was the week that was right. There's no bigger story in F1 hinge. Oh, pull the other one, Cameron. Talk about something different. But there are downstream ramifications of the Liam Lawson Red Bull saga, as at the Japanese Grand Prix, it's Tsunoda-san's turn. But I think the job might be a bit too big, difficult for him. Again, potentially his failure will be at the altar of experience, but moreover at the altar of how difficult that RB21 car is to drive. Let me tell you about this. Helmut Marko said that Yuki Tsunoda will get at least till the end of the year to prove that he's the ideal teammate to Max Verstappen going forward. We believe he can do the job, says Dr. Helmut Marko. Why now, chap? What's bloody changed? The reason why you didn't give him last year is because you thought he was too temperamental, too mercurial to sit in alongside Max Verstappen in that pressure cooker. Why now, therefore? I'm trying to understand in real time. What's the variable change? Well, of course, they've had their back to the wall now at the altar of yet another poor low-level decision. And again, it's surprising, is it not? Because Red Bull are champions, have been each of the past 3 years, at least, of the drivers' variety. 4 years to look, you can't even count them. So frequently are they winning championships. So how then are they still making decisions at the altar of poor decision making? What? This makes no sense. This is absolute nonsense. Well, I would see them that, and I would raise them this, that Max Verstappen for the last 2 years at the very least has been papering over their deficits. Their very grainy operational infrastructure. The fact that there is nothing if not a deluge of intellectual property and god tier F1 minds who have left that team. Mention no names: Rob Marshall, Adrian Newey, Dan Fallows, Jonathan Wheatley. You cannot replace those dudes. Pierre Vacher and Enrico Balbo said that they'd be able to operate in a way that was independent, that don't worry about Adrian Newey leaving. He hasn't touched a car for 3 years, courtesy of his motorcycling accident. Now look though, they've got an RB21 car that only Maximilian Verstappen can drive, and Tsunoda-san, sadly for all concerned, not least Tsunoda fans all around the world, is going to find out soon at his home Grand Prix, and that won't be a good look. Let me tell you the extent of the problem that Red Bull have, if past his prologue. 6 teammates in 3.5 years. What? Yes, Max Verstappen has had 6 teammates in 3.5 years. Unprecedented circumstances, if ever you've seen it. As far as the turnaround, the churn of Sir Liam Lawson he calls him. 188 races is how many races Max has raced for the Bulls that are red. 173 hours was the time between Liam Lawson at the end of the Australian Grand Prix and he's been sacked. This is ridiculous, chat. We can't do this again, Benzi. It's nonsense. Like, you couldn't write it in a book, for they wouldn't believe you. Nobody can extend that nor suspend their disbelief that much. It's ridiculous from the Bulls that are red. And again, what I'm wrestling with is the juxtaposition of their sporting endeavour par excellence. This is the team that races hard now. This is Jonathan Wheatley. This is Christian Horner, Adrian Newey. This is 2021 settings. This is getting in the face of Michael Massey with a view to leverage and influence, wield your influence even, with a view to effect change in real time. What happened since then? What happened to the goatiest that's ever goated, the last airbender and his RB16B that leveraged god tier levels of aerodynamic efficiency? What's happened to that elasticity of the aerodynamic variety settings? What happened to Rob Marshall? Well, he's gone over to McLaren and he's plying his trade there. This makes no sense, as again, I try and do the compare and contrast in real time. But F1 aficionados, great F1 aficionados, would argue that the headline in all of this is now they have an RB21 which only one man can drive on the grid. That dude has a name, and his name, Benzi, is Maximilian Verstappen. Incompetent, idiotic Red Bull. All they can do is deflect. What a huge fool. Turtle says, does anybody think Horner is on the way of being pushed? Turtle, imminent. I promise you. I mean, everything that we're going to talk about here will be under the umbrella heading of a potential change in C-suite execs. Christian Horner, listen, that Sam timer has been turned around on his time. So too Frederick Vasseur. He doesn't have long. Red Bull will move. Listen, don't think they weren't looking to get rid of him last year. A cheeky conversation with Charlie Mividra is the only thing that saved him. And again, the relationship that Christian has with Charlie Mividra, the likes of which, I don't know, you can compare it to an adopted son, as so many people have done. But that can only last for so long, especially when you're not winning championship, and especially when the jewel in your crown has at least 1 foot and 1 eye out the door. Let me tell you though, this is what I've been trying to wrestle with. Why is that? I keep hearing people say that the car's so difficult to drive. Only Max can drive it. Why? I want to understand, and that's led me to do a bit of due diligence, reading the legend that is Mark Hughes, and he's explained it in a way that I don't think anybody else can. I'm going to read you out 2 paragraphs. One of them is Michael Schumacher talking about his car and the way that he likes the handling dynamic. The other is one Maximilian Verstappen, for some say soon to be 5-time champion. I want you in the chat to tell me which one is which. Here's your first paragraph. People say I like oversteer. I don't. I can handle it and drive it, but I don't want it. With a neutral car, you can have it sliding from turn in to exit, and all the time you can just drive on the limit of the 4 tyres given grip. And that's what I'm always looking to achieve. I had cars that did that. With a little input, you could make it go all the way you wanted it to go. Your second paragraph, again, I quote, I like a pointy car, but with a rear that is just stable enough to have a controlled balance. I like a strong front end. I don't really like understeer. It's just killing the whole feel of a car. The strong front end with a rear that is just on the edge. But of course, you still need that rear to rely on. Who is who, chat? One of them is Michael Schumacher talking about his whip, the way he likes to drive, his preferred handling dynamic. The other is Maximilian Verstappen, for some say soon to be 5-time champion. Which is which? Oh, wait. Non-rhetorical question. Well, of course, for those of you with a discerning F1 eye, the first is Michael Schumacher and the second is Maximilian Verstappen. But they are interchangeable, are they not? That the both of them like front ends and the both of them like a malleable rear, using which they can float around them at turn-in/apex. That's how they weaponize speed around these low minimum, medium duration, hairpin-esque, rascas-esque turns. Now, bear that in mind when we start talking about the RB21. Because again, remember, ground effect era cars, if you have a pointy nose, people, again, go to your minds infinitely more goatee than I could ever be, have argued that that's the quickest type of car, a difficult one to handle, mercurial, temperamental in its handling dynamic. And Red Bull have been barking up that design philosophy tree, rightfully or wrongfully, for the longest time now. No, but now they are at the tipping point, at the peak of the mountain that is Everest. It's going to get techie for them now because nobody else can drive that car. And if they lose Maximilian Verstappen, who are they going to get in? Chat. Again, non-rhetorical question. Max hates understeer. There you go, Benzi, you've clocked it. Who are they going to get in to drive that car in its current, how we characterize it currently? No one. No one is going to be able to drive that car. So as far as diversifying their portfolio, their artillery using which they hope to win silverware, both of the drivers and constructors variety, is getting techier than techie things for them though. They are lacking in diversity. Here's what Mark Hughes says about the handling dynamic. It sounds simple as far as what Max Verstappen likes, but what separates both Max and Michael from their teammates is and was the feel for transition, trading off rotation against scrub. Max Verstappen's sim racing partner Atsi Kirchhoff is also an F1 driver and F1 coach. When the Red Bull was a bit of a lazy car at the beginning of 2022, it was very easy to drive, leaning towards understeer. Understeer though, this chap says, is a very boring way to drive a car, because whatever you do with the black brake pedal at a certain point, the car just doesn't rotate anymore. A pointy car, however, wants to rotate more than you want it to. And what Max does very well is that he can balance the car if it's too pointy. You can balance it more than everybody else because he knows the traction limit and he knows how the car behaves, and he knows how to handle the car when it goes beyond the traction limit. So he's not scared of it. As far as traction limits, if it were a cliff, Max Verstappen goes right up to the cliff edge and has the ability, the internal gyroscope, the foresight, the god tier handling, steering and accelerator inputs to look beyond the cliff edge with zero fear. That's what Maximilian Verstappen has that none of the other 19, you could argue, have, that enables him to drive, to optimize and get 10/10ths of the lap time out of that RB21 when the likes of Liam Lawson simply cannot do it. They don't have that level in their locker, and that's why Liam Lawson is left wanting, because he wants a benign car. He doesn't want to ride that chariot, that fire-breathing dragon, that bull that is the RB21. It's too unpredictable, especially as far as it's balanced throughout the different stages of turn, at the apex, turning and on exit. It's going to present different characteristics at different phases of the turn. Liam has spoken to that, and he says that he can't handle it. What he needed was time to get his feet underneath that Red Bull table, but time was the one thing that he simply didn't have. This chap continues, Max can make that car, the front end car, nice and smooth and make use of that extra rotation, and he can cancel it with his inputs in the points where he doesn't need it. The last 5/10 is dancing a very thin line, balancing the car and stepping away from the textbook style of being aggressive on the brakes, very smooth coming off, turning at the right time. He's doing something different, this chap is, and that's the crux of the automotive pugilistic equation for which Tsunoda-san will need to solve, and I am reserving judgment. I'm scared for Tsunoda-san. I'm glad that they've given him a year. He'll have the next 22 races to get his feet underneath the table, but do not get it twisted for a second. Of course, they're expecting good things from him as at the Japanese Grand Prix. Suzuka is his track, his hometown track. For Pete's sake, Tsunoda, of course, is expected to go well. And it's not just Red Bull looking at Yuki. It's Honda even. They're paying $20 million of the dollars US to Red Bull to make sure that Yuki can have that seat. And they will need paying off. Nobody wants to be associated with a driver that can't get through to Q2 even. Don't think, Yuki, for a second that you're going to get in that car and replicate Liam Lawson's level of underperformance. Absolutely no flipping chance, lest you want for Helmut Marko to expedite the path of one Arvid Lindblad to the head team alongside Maximilian Verstappen. Rest assured, I think they think Arvid Lindblad is potentially the next one. They are sacrificing Yuki, says. I don't disagree. You know, I saw Helmut comment that Max was not happy with Yuki. I don't think Max was not happy with Yuki. I think Max wasn't happy with the way that they dealt with Liam Lawson. Those two were mates. Maximilian Verstappen used to watch one Liam Lawson in Super Formula. Liam Lawson said that they used to talk about certain races, specific, get nuanced, that there was no other driver on the F1 grid that would talk to Liam Lawson about his races in Super Formula because nobody else was watching them. Max and Liam were mates. That's why you had Max underneath Guido van der Garde's Instagram post saying that racing Red Bull even were bullying Liam Lawson, that they were too hasty in their change, that Max Verstappen like that tells you everything you need to know about the relationship as at the 28th of the 3rd 2025 between Max and Red Bull. I'm telling you, listen, you need to take this thing seriously. The least likely outcome here, eventuality even, is that Maximilian Verstappen will go to an Aston Martin or a Mercedes within the next 12 months, sabbatical settings potentially. He has the option to null and void his contract if indeed he's outside the driver's standing. Some say as soon as the Suzuka, the Japanese Grand Prix. Mark Hughes continues, because again, I'm interested in this chat. Indulge me for a second. Everybody always says that the car's so difficult and only Max Verstappen can drive it. Why? Wanted to deep dive it, and again, Mark Hughes, one of the go-toest ones. All journos are created equal E, but some are created more equal than others. Mark Hughes continues, intuitively feeling that point where the rotation needs to be checked with the smallest inputs of brake and steering allows outrageous speed to be taken in without the penalty of time-consuming slides. Max Verstappen, therefore, what I think Mark Hughes is saying, operates on the fringes of track limits. That's where he's most comfortable. That's different though. There's not a lot of maybe Sir Lewis in his heyday. Maybe Sir Lewis liked to operate on the fringes, the way that he acts, the way that he's so aggressive on the brakes, potentially. But Max has been doing this as long as he's been alive. Mark Hughes continues, watching Lawson desperately try to make sense of the Red Bull in Shanghai. He would take the speed in and turn, only then to find himself correcting big snaps of oversteer because he's asking too much of the car, chat. And this is why I say it's like Max Verstappen is some sort of mechanical conductor on using the steering throttle inputs like they're some sort of instrument, right? Operating them concurrently, not in silos, but holistically, understanding the impacts of each one of them at any particular second on any given part of the track. And that's bloody important. Therein lies Maximilian Verstappen's gift. Mark Hughes continues, watching Lawson desperately try to make sense of the Red Bull in Shanghai. He would take the speed and turn in, only to then find himself correcting big snaps of oversteer. The slat sensitivity, a demanding car, just wasn't in the same league, but put them in a less pointy car, a la Checo Perez in 2022 when he was going gangbusters, Monaco settings, Liam Lawson would be much closer. That's why you put the young, hungry lion Liam Lawson back in that Racing Bulls car. And again, it's not the least likely probability that Liam Lawson goes well at the Japanese Grand Prix. Imagine a world for a second, chat, where Liam Lawson outqualifies Tsunoda-san. Oh, the humanity, yeah. I'm telling you, I reckon, listen, if that's a bet that's going, I will take those odds each and every single time. Though, this is not financial advice. Musa, 1K, I know, Musa, you're a legend. You guys are let me say before I go on to the next topic about McLaren and clampdown of the FIA variety and potential cheating, infringement of the rules. You guys, I'm telling you, different caliber each and every single time. My name is above the door, but this community, this channel is built upon your not insubstantial shoulders. I promise you, I'm grateful ad infinitum. Those words do the circumstance a disservice. Understatement central. Right, should we talk about McLaren? Sorry, Cam. Saying that a prime Lewis would have driven that sharp front end Maxi Ball is a disrespect to both their driving. Potentially too much. But this driving style thing, you talk to different people and you'll get different synopses, will you not? Different characters. It's really, really hard. I still struggle. Friend of the channel, Peter Windsor, I still struggle to understand how you can just watch the car from different angles and get a good read on the stuff. I just can't do. I just don't understand it. I've got to watch tape upon tape, hundreds of hours to get a good feel of how Lewis is driving as versus Max. Plus, for the avoidance that a chap like Max Verstappen will drive a different turn in a different circumstance, a different way. As an example, Everyone always like to say that Max is super late on the brakes as versus, let's say, a Liam Lawson. And there's graphics renders out there where you can see them being compared across the Chinese Singapore, the Chinese Shanghai International Circuit, back to back to back. And you can see Liam Lawson he's later on the brakes. But then that speaks to the fact that Max it's like an aerodynamic empathy that he leverages with a view to get 10/10ths out of the RB21 at each and every single turn, twisty and juncture. But then, this is what I mean. If you look at, I want to say, Fernando Alonso versus Max Verstappen at Monaco in 2023. You remember the time in Sector 3 where Max Verstappen, he was like a 10th down, then he ended up 2/10ths that gapped Fernando Alonso across a 20-second sector, Sector 3, to the tune of, was it 2/10ths, 3/10ths? I forget, lost in the roundings. But if you look at Rascasse and the way that Max Verstappen takes that turn, realizing that he's so far behind, normally very early on the brakes, into Rascasse, V-line, super late on the brakes. I only say that to say it's different in different contexts, is it not? You can't just say Max is early on the brakes at each and every single twisty, because he's not. It would depend on the circumstance. It would depend on the temperature, both track, ambient. It would depend on the tyres, the nature of the tyres, the rate of deg on the tyres are exhibiting. So too, it would depend on the corner that he's attacking. Max, and I would argue Lewis, are both super adaptable in the way they drive a car, understanding in real time the circumstance, an automotive Rubik's Cube as far as the physical challenge for which they need to solve. Do you know what I mean? Marie says, it's always a pleasure to know you're a legend. You guys, I'm telling you, different types of legends. Marie, I'm trying out here, but again, listen, all of this is, it's more you. I'm a minority shareholder in this. Do you know what I mean? Just coming to distill this information. Go on, let's talk about McLaren, because this is where it gets techie. Cheating. What are you talking about, Cameron? How dare you use that term so flippantly? Well, cheating in F1 is a different thing, is it not? In fact, let me tell you this. Prepared slides, and I'm not going to waste them. Yuki Tsunoda back in. Look at that. I mean, you can't hate that, right? First pictures of Yuki Tsunoda back in Red Bull overalls. Listen, I just hope that it's not a poison chalice, sword of Damocles settings, because he looks happy, does Yuki. But again, I would love to have a chat with Yuki and just ensure that he understands the gradient of the mountain hill up which he needs to climb. Difficult car to drive, pressurized circumstance. No longer has he got a free berth and goodwill, because Helmut Marko nor Christian Horner wanted him in that car in the first instance. You recall Abu Dhabi, final race of the year. Post that race, there was testing. During that testing, Yuki Tsunoda impressed the Red Bull engineers, but the key decision makers, mentioned no names, Christian Horner, had long flew back on the private jet, didn't even hang around to see Yuki Tsunoda impressed. Like, what are we doing? Ro, you're a legend. Who are your top 5 drivers? Oh, Ro. I mean, as at now, top 5 ever, we talking, Ro? You gotta go Max, Lewis, Senna, Jim, Oliver, Alan, maybe, Techie, Fangio in there too. Ro, we'll have that conversation another day. I'm far too kind, by the way. There's Yuki Tsunoda. Conversely, Liam Lawson, aka modern day Jenson. But how much can one person look like Jenson Button? If you told me that dude was Jenson Button's twin brother, notwithstanding of course age differences, I would believe you. That, ladies and gentlemen, is chaos. If you showed me that picture and just told me that was a young Jenson Button back in the day, McLaren day settings, I would believe you. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is Liam Lawson back in his natural habitat, devoid of pressure cooker circumstances and the suffocating pressure expectation loop that is the balls that are red. Liam Lawson first shots back at Racing Bulls, and I don't hate it. I reckon he'll thrive there, you know, chat. I'm convinced that Liam Lawson will go well at not necessarily his home Grand Prix, but a track around which he's got the most experience. Lest we forget, Australia had never been round, and I think it's the same thing in China. These were brand new tracks to him, a brand new car, brand new handling dynamic, RB20, the techiest of techie cars to drive and solve for. Understand? It's crazy. I don't know. Good luck, Tsunoda-san. Do you know what I mean? Go on then, let's talk about McLaren. So I keep reading all this stuff about this slot gap. I mean, what are we doing here? They changed the rules. Okay, let me give you, let me give you broader context. One of the main remits and scopes of the FIA is to ensure not only to institute for the rules and regulations in a way that's consistent across all related parties, tick, but secondarily to ensure that the competitive landscape is sufficiently level across, again, all related parties and F1 competitors. What does that mean? Well, that means you can't afford for one driver and or team to get 1,000 miles down the road, right? Why? Because nobody will watch. Now, for the past 10 years, I've been a bit skeptical as to the extent that the FIA have wielded this power. I don't know. I want to talk about 22. In fact, Mercedes, we can definitely talk about, right? Party mode. Where did that go? Why are we penalising Mercedes for their genius innovation? A party mode as an example, taking away their barge boards going into 2021, 22. Like, all of this went away, right? Because this was in Mercedes' durable competitive advantage. Now, why did they do that to Mercedes? Well, you can't have a sport that's monotonous. Go back to 2000 to 2004. All my mates stopped watching. Me, even as diehard as an F1 fan as I am, there was a while there during peak Michael Schumacher era, peak oil theory Michael Schumacher, when I just sacked it off. I would dial in for the start of the race and I would just go away. I'd watch the first 5 minutes when there was some action off the starting line, and I'd go back for like an hour and a half, and I'd come back in and watch the last 10. And I don't think I was alone in that. As sacrilegious and blasphemous as that sounds, a lot of my mates did that. Why? Because there was no uncertainty, there were no stakes. You can bet your last dollar, your bottom line, your wife and your kids, that Michael Schumacher was going to win 99% of the time, and that's bad for business. Ratings did one of these. Nobody was watching. Yeah, of course, it was one of the greatest eras of F1. Some of the greatest, most excellent sporting endeavour par excellent performances that you will ever see in your life. But so many part-time casuals just sacked it off. And then, of course, if you're trying to grow a sport, then a period of dominance, no monotony like Michael Schumacher 2000 to 2004 is not going to help you. Indeed, it will hinder your cause. Where are we in 2025, or where were we in 2014 to 2020 when it was Mercedes, Lewis, Rosberg, Lewis. You didn't need to tune in to know who was going to win. You know what I mean? You could cheat this exam. Go out, watch the first 5 minutes off the start, come back at the last 5 minutes. Lewis Hamilton has won again. Okay, cool. That's why the FIA then were doing their damnedest to take away the sources of durable competitive advantage as far as Mercedes. Party mode gone, barge boards gone, all of this tack on aerodynamics going into 2022 gone. Take that away again. That's what they did then, and that's what I would argue as far as the path of McLaren to competitiveness in 2024. I would argue that, again, it was the altar of flexi-wing, both front and rear. They'd sorted out their floor and floor edges, of course. But then, Safak, you're a legend. I know, Safak, do me a favour and smash the like. Safak, too kind as always. So then, in 2024, I would argue the leveling of the competitive landscape looks something like this. When McLaren were doing all their sexy bits, as an example, a case in point, your Exhibit A, you only need to go back and refer to Oscar Jack Piastri's performance at Baku, right? When you see the rear-facing camera and exactly what that mini DRS was doing, nobody's going to tell me that Oscar can hold off a fire-breathing dragon in Charles Leclerc, aka modern-day Jean Alesi, without that very cheeky mini DRS. Take that mini DRS, and McLaren no longer had the whip hand at Baku. There is no way OJ Piastri would have held off Charles Leclerc for the final stint of that Grand Prix. Why did they allow that to happen, FIA? Well, this is why. Because you had a monotonous Grand Prix, a now monotonous era of Maximilian Verstappen dominance and you needed a new young hungry dragon to come up from the embers. That young hungry dragon in that instance had a name, and his name was McLaren, especially in the hands of one Lando Norris. You need change again if you're going to attract and keep new attention dollars, particularly of the fabled age demographic that is 18 to 35s. They've just come off Drive to Survive. They've come to the sport by dint of 2021 and the gangbusters season that was. Do you think they're going to stay tuned for Max Verstappen dominance year after year after year? Absolutely flipping not. Just as they didn't during Michael Schumacher's era 2000 to 2004, just as they didn't during Seb Vettel's era 2010 to 2013, just as people, part-time casuals in particular, started to dial out during Sir Lewis Hamilton's era 2014-15, then 2017 through all the way through to 2020. If you know the result, then why watch? And this is all about whys. Give me a reason, a why to watch. You take all those away and I go and spend my time, do you know what I mean, with my family. Better spent reading a book if there are no stakes and circumstances, if I know who's going to win the race before a wheel has been turned. Now, as we go into 2025, it's still Maximilian Verstappen dominance now, but I feel like McLaren, by dint of their MCL 3.9, because they focused on anti-dive, the front suspension set, they now have the whip hand. That car is god tier, gapping the rest of the field. Sans for Max Verstappen's input. He's been able to handle that RB21. Visual, you're a different type of legend. Schumacher succeeded where the 80s legend fell. Absolutely. In fact, it's also part of entertainment. Ergo, the Patriots' dominance in American football. No, it's a very good point, Wayne. It's sport. This is weird, though, isn't it? This dichotomy. It's sports come sports entertainment. It's a very I'd argue it's a dotted line between the two. It's almost hard. You've got to squint your eye to see where sports ends and sports entertainment begins as far as Formula One is concerned in March of 2025. Why? Well, because I would argue that, again, we'll talk about FIA's clampdown, but I would argue where they were looking to the side last year because of McLaren, now they've got the lens on McLaren because they're scared 2 races in that McLaren are going to be too dominant. Where they did one of these last year as far as mini DRS at the back, flexi wing at the front, now they've got their scopes on everything because they know that McLaren 4 to 5 tenths, that's half a second, a chasm in Formula One terms. That's the context. Here's what's happened. The Race wrote a brilliant article arguing that maybe, where has McLaren's pace gone? You remember testing, everybody said MCL 3.9, the quickest car bar none. And then at Australia, you saw what time it was. Of course, Maximilian Verstappen was able to do god tier things in changeable conditions. That's his remit. That's his gift. But as soon as it dried out over the course of just a few laps, Lando and OJ Piastri were gonzo, gapping him to the tune of 16 seconds in only a few laps. It was chaos. And again, that's where you see this normalized. For stable circumstances, the McLaren is the dominant car and it's not even close. Red flag, therefore, FI, if your remit is levelling the competitive landscape and ensuring, courtesy of the FOM, that people are going to carry on watching, attracting people to the sport. So I think what's going on in real time is that they're trying to clamp down on this McLaren dominance. Nobody will watch. If Lando goes and wins the next 20 races, there won't be anyone in the world left to watch it. You may as well just sack off the championship. Boring settings, monotonous settings. So here's what's happened. You heard that there was all this chat about the slot gap again. Let me get my cheeky George Russell slides out and show you what I'm on about here. So you know that there was a slot gap and they identified this at the Australian Grand Prix. Here's what I mean. On your top right, you can see the slot gap. Again, it looks a lot bigger, right? That was the McLaren rear wing slot gap as at the Australian Grand Prix. On the bottom right, you can see the slot gap adjusted now for the new rules and regs, the new technical directive, as at the Chinese Grand Prix at the Shanghai International Circuit. Now, the principle is this. If you got the top right, that's effectively a mini DRS. Not quite as effective. It lacks the absolute terms of efficacy. However, I mean, if you don't have DRS, some air is still able to get to that gap. FIA saw that tallied with the 4 to 5 tenths they know is the durable competitive advantage of that MCL 3.9 against the rest of the grid. And they said before China, right, we've had enough, notwithstanding. And again, this is a tone change as far as the FIA, because you'll remember Tom Biasis and all the FIA bods last year, when it was clear that McLaren had a flexi wing both at the front and the rear. They said, you know what, chaps, if it passes the load test, good to go, mate. 50 newtons or whatever it is, 75, it passes the load test, it's good to go. Forgetting all the while that's the static load test aren't going to replicate the loads at speed, right? 150, 200 miles an hour. The load test isn't fit for purpose. Tom Biasis and the FIA did one of these at the time again, didn't they? Oh, whatever. Nothing to see here. Passes the load test. We're Gucci. Good to go. Now, however, understanding the extent of the delta between the Papaya team and the rest, now we're changing it. Of course we are. Now, some will argue that, well, that's always going to be F1. Sometimes you've got to amend and change the rules in real time with a view to make sure that the competitive landscape is as level as possible. I would argue that there's been a paradigm shift in the attitude of the FIA towards this sort of stuff. And again, I'd argue, if we're putting our thinking investigative caps on, that's a function of the delta, the materiality of the delta between the Papaya Killer team and the rest. Now, going into the China Grand Prix, they said, you know what, we're going to amend for our test. You see that cheeky slot gap at your top, on the top right of your screen? Too big. 0.75 millimeters. Nah, mate, 0.5 millimeters, because we're only giving you a week or so to fix for it. We're going to give you a margin of error of 0.25. So again, effectively 0.75, but you can see materially, just to the eye, that McLaren slot gap at the top right is materially bigger than the one at your bottom right. Therefore, go on, let me tell you this. This is how you know something's happening. I had conversations about McLaren, trying to understand what's going on in real time, where the performance is there sometimes and then all of a sudden it's disappeared. We'll need longer to evaluate this properly and draw some proper definitive conclusions. We will. But let me tell you something again, putting our investigative F1 caps on, and I'm going to read these out to you. Look. So the times in the first race, the speed trap times, is the best way that you can assess this, right? So go and have a look at the speed trap times through Q3. In Australia, look, Lando Norris's speed trap, Q3 again, 328 kilometers per hour. Oscar Piastri's was 329. Max Verstappen, 2 kilometers quicker than was Oscar on 331 kilometers an hour. Ergo, all of the aforementioned, very, very quick through the speed trap. As near as makes no difference, the same speed, yeah. Fast forward to China, Shanghai International Circuit. Let me read out the times. The speed trap maximal velocities. Lando Norris, 332 kilometers per hour. Piastri, 332 again. Max Verstappen, 339. What? What's going on here? They're materially different now all of a sudden, right? They were, as near as makes no difference, the same in Australia. And now, as at the Chinese Grand Prix, massively different. What's driving that? Now, there could be loads of variables, right? Setup potentially. Maybe Lando and Oscar asked for more downforce, conscious of the risk of graining, particularly of the front left at the Chinese Grand Prix Shanghai International Circuit. Perhaps that's the truth, but I would argue so material is that delta. And you know, when you scan up, I wanted to fair test it, right? So I looked at other drivers to see whether they were going as, and broadly, a lot of them, especially the mid-pack, were going around 332 in China. However, George Russell, 338 kilometers per hour. So why, therefore, were McLaren so slow in China and so bloody quick in straight lines in Australia? I would argue that this is potentially a function of the FIA enforcing the rules as they should have done in 2024, but it's different now. McLaren have the whip and durable competitive advantage as far as speed. The race have written a really good article, and I'm going to read some of their key blurb out from there. One key question the race writes remains: has McLaren lost straight line performance due to the FIA's stricter anti-flex rear wing regulations that were introduced as at the Chinese Grand Prix? Because during that session. Sprint, they were nowhere right, and then all of a sudden it gets to the race, or gets to quali 2 even, and then they're god too quick all of a sudden. The race writes, the McLaren MCL39 continues to struggle in dirty air, a trait carried over from last season. This became evident during the sprint race, where Norris, despite having a quick car, failed to make progress and was stuck in 6th place for the entirety of the race. It's weird. It is weird that they're so quick. It's weird that they've managed to weaponize this very ambitious front suspension setup, focusing, of course, on anti-dive, making sure that they've got a stable platform throughout the track, irrespective of the physics challenge that's being put forth to the car. But then all of a sudden in dirty air, gonzo. That they focus on mitigating for tyre deg, or at least the rate at which their tyres deg. And then all of a sudden, when there's rain in Australia, Maximilian Verstappen's right with, something weird is going on. The race writes, the FIA enforced strict rear wing flexibility tests in China with the maximum deflection of the slot gap between the main plane, what we just showed you on my screen, between the main plane and the DRS limited to 0.75 millimeters. It's now down to 0.5 millimeters for the next race in Japan. There you go. So they're gonna be impacted. Right, let me pull this up again so you guys can see as I'm talking. McLaren didn't deny, and again, remember, I remember Lando and Norris saying, you know what, the rules are the rules are the rules, but we're not going to be affected by any changes because we were already not infringing. Well, how about now, Lando? Before you were 303, look at this. The speed trap times 332 in China versus 339 of Max Verstappen. What's happened, therefore? I would argue that, I mean, if we're going to leverage some cheeky Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is that something's changing. I would argue there's a change in the way that the FIA are enforcing these slot gap rules. The race continues. The McLaren didn't deny the behaviour of its rear wing. Let me start that again. McLaren didn't deny that the behaviour of its rear wing had caught the eye of the FIA, but the team denied that it had to make any changes to its rear wing to pass the compliance test. McLaren's technical director of engineering, Neil Hoodley, said on Friday, luckily, we were tested in Melbourne and the numbers that the FIA chose to put in a technical directive are higher than the deflection test that we did. I don't trust them. I don't trust. This feels like fuel flow gate all over again. I need to see the evidence of this because I don't think they're to be trusted. I remember fuel flow gate happened and we never got the outcomes. We never saw. All that we got to see was a settlement line in the financial statements of the FIA. Now, that's not good enough, right? I thought Mohammed Ben Sulayem said that they were open and honest and transparent and each and every single judge. Nowhere to be seen. Nates, that's two. Patrick says, look at Max closing in at the end of the race when he sat back in the beginning of the midway, but then moved right up to the leader. He moved 5 laps sooner. He would have been on the podium. We're talking about China. Well, Patrick, it's techie. It's a good point. It's a good point, and Christian Horner speaks to this. He says, at the end of the first stint, Maximilian Verstappen was 18 seconds adrift of the race lead. At the end of the second stint, he'd gapped the race lead to the tune of 2 seconds. Now, in absolute terms, the gap was only 16 seconds. However, Patrick, again, you got to do apples and apples in this, right? You got to normalise for the fact that the McLaren pair were turning down their engines and managing for reliability the whole of the second stint. So extensive and material was the gap that they had over the rest of the field. I would argue that if they were going 10 tenths, that gap, that 18-second gap at the end of the first stint might have been more nearer 30 seconds than 16, to be honest. So again, you got to normalise for that, Patrick. What's up? What are you saying, Neil? It's techie. I've just joined. Please, can I have a high level set? Neil, don't do that, chuff. You got to rewind, mate. It would be remiss of me, neglectful for me to just do a synopsis of all that we've covered. Just hit the rewind button, chap. So go on then. Let me finish off the race. The technical engineer said, yeah, we were good. So too, Lando Norris said we're good as far as amendments, that we don't need to tinker with the rear wing. But then it feels like they needed to tinker. Otherwise, why else would we see such a maximal velocity speed drop off through the speed trap? The FIA says 4 or 5 teams wouldn't have been compliant with the tests had they been introduced in Australia. And the race understands that McLaren was among the 4 teams whose degree of flexing prompted the FIA's clampdown. There it is. The FIA have told you as much. that McLaren would have needed to change, that they would have infringed upon the rules and regs had the load test in China been the load test in Australia. It continues, some teams, this is the FIA talking now, some teams were already okay with the new compliance test in Australia, but I think this is Tom Biasis talking by the way, but I think 4 or 5 were not and were in breach therefore, and they had to take some action between the Australian Grand Prix and China, and we tested them all. This is the FIA's single seat director, Nicholas Tombiasis. He said that in China. Tombiasis was asked, look at this, what was the slot gap of McLaren as at China? Tombiasis replied, I don't remember the exact number of McLaren and I don't want to talk about teams, but I'm not sure if it was 0.75 millimeters, therefore in breach. They just don't even know. Honestly, the FIA, it's too late in the stream for me to go scorched earth on the FIA, but when that dude said I don't remember the exact number, what? This is impactful. This is material. It's instrumental, these type of things. They're not lost in the roundings. It's material as far as deciding which way the championship's going to go, right? Was it 0.75 or was it 0.71? When you were testing bloody Lewis and Gasly and Charles Leclerc as far as the extent to which their skid plank had worn, do you know what I mean? Millimeters mattered then. So why don't they matter now? Tom Barsis, you've got to have your fingers around this chap. If indeed you want to consider yourself fit for purpose as a regulatory body. But I digress. 4 teams mentioned McLaren cheat. Yeah, true. I don't know the names of the other ones, Benzi. Do you know what I mean? You can rewatch it after the live is at Daniel, you're a legend. F1 boy. Oh, the humanity late to the stream. How very dare you, Neil? How about the other 4 or 5 teams? Alpine admitted they had to change their flex wing. I didn't get the name of them. Please be respectful in the comments. 100% Turtle. Alpine was near the fastest before the flexi rear wing clamped down. Very true. It's never too late to go scorched earth on the FIA cam. I can't do it. Do I do it, JD? Do I go scorched earth? Go on then. 2 minutes of scorched earth, Cameron, on the FIA. What do they think they're doing? How dare they? Regulatory body of F1, billion-dollar entity, sport, the one that we know and loved, have known and loved all our life, and they can't get their arms around this sport and institute for the rules in a way which is true and fair, representative across all related parties in a way that's consistent. What are we doing here? Checo Perez full start the other year, and you can't know because the transponders aren't working. Same thing as far as bloody Lando Norris, full start. My little one's 4 years old. He can look at that and tell you that it's a full start. So why can't you? What are you getting paid for? 40 million is how much the F1 pays the FIA to procure a service, to do what they're supposed to do, and they do nothing of the sort, have not done for years now, and it's unacceptable. And what's worse, you've got Mohammed Ben Sulayem acting as if he's got this under control. Do you know what I mean? Transparent, fair, nothing of the sort, but yet and still every time they release an annual statement, that's what they peacock as if they've been doing all along. The FIA, what are we talking about? Ferrari international assistants back in the day. Now what? FIA? No, it's nonsense. I cannot wait. I have a bottle of champers on ice, yet and still ready to pop the day that somebody supersedes Mohammed Ben Sulayem as the president of the regulatory body of Formula One, the FIA. It's techier than techie things, but the F1 keeps pushing it. Why do I keep saying the F1? I think if you say the F1, I think you should be banned from watching F1. Not to proselytize, but the F1 is proper black. It's sacrilegious, isn't it? F1. I feel like it's like saying, and again, this is me prejudicing against our North American contingent, but pit lane. It's the pit lane. I've always heard it said the pit lane, but not dissimilar to pole. I always used to say pole. Now hearing Mr. Windsor and Matt Bishop, friend of the channels both, say the pole. I've changed my verbiage and I started to say the pole. It's weird this. I'm being too proselytizing and judging. FI internal controls eliminate. They've got nothing. It's ridiculous. Eddie, that's why people loved Kimi, even though he was an ASS on the radio. That is who he was and never changed. Hamilton pretends to be Mr. Virtuous, but hangs with Hollywood. Oh my gosh, Eddie. I knew you were going to put something in there that I wouldn't be able to read out. Marie, It's our F1, not the F1. I agree with you. Cameron, you and all of us, mate. Mohammed Ben Salam needs to go creative. That's okay. We're all entitled to our opinions. Of course, this is what we've come to do on the channel, to have a cheeky argument, but keep it respectful each and every single time. This channel will be nothing if not for the modes of discourse. MBS brother runs due, but mate, I'm not even going to, I can't go into MBS and his connects, his affiliates who are related to TGW Sports, the entity that's meant to be entering Cadillac F1 as at 2026. It's chaos. Where's that bloody GM link? What? You meant to be an OEM here. Like, where's GM and nowhere to be seen as far as the filings? We'll talk about that another day. Guys, I'm going to run. You guys have been legends. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. McLaren cheating. Derek, have a rewind and check. Listen, how I define cheating finally. If you break the rules, then you've cheated now. Whether the regular two, listen, if you're offside and score a goal, I suppose that's kind of a grey area as far as football. But F1's so grey and also so binary. Look, if Lewis's skid plank wore to the tune of like 4 millimeters or 0.4 millimeters, then not cheating implies intent. Do you know what I mean? If McLaren rock up, as they did in Baku, with a mini DRS knowingly, what is that if not cheating? If it's not cheating, then I don't know what is. Guys, you guys have been legends. Thank you so much. See you same time, same place tomorrow. Between now and then, the prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.